So, in the last video I promised this.
Next week, I will be adding 30 levels to Galaxy Bash.
And you've already read the title, so I don't think I need to explain. But basically, when I made the game, I had 7 days. And I made 30 levels. So I figured 7 days is a week. So from last week to this week, I can make 30 levels, right? Those original 7 days, I had the whole week off. Whereas this time, I had to work my full 40 hours, plus family and eating and sleeping. So trying to get 30 levels finished in 1 week, well, it was ambitious. But at least we can talk about what I got done this week, even though I didn't manage to get 30 levels. In case you don't know who I am, I'm Helper Wesley. I've made these games, and I make weekly devlogs. Let's get into the video. Starting with how I approached designing the 30 levels. I decided the best idea was to just come up with the 3 mechanics first, and then expand on them as I made the levels. Using my wife as a bouncing board to bounce ideas off of. She's not a video gamer, but she has played games on her phone, and so some of these made sense to her. The first one was a clock, or a reset mechanic, or a death mechanic, basically some way to lose. So since I didn't start this game with a color palette, which I think we should all be doing, I decided to just make something up. And then I just used circle over circle over circle, and then used one of the tools in GIMP to just make 8 hands for the clock, and I gave them a spiraling effect to make it look like the clock is doing something time-wise. It has some sort of temporal effect. The next mechanic I decided to put in the game was actually going to be for level 51 to 60, and that was a pickup that when you pick it up, the stars spawn into the world, so you have to kind of go through the map to get to that point, and then either go back or continue on to get the stars that spawn. This mechanic I figured could effectively double the size of even a single screen, because you go through it once, and then once you hit that pickup, suddenly you have to do it all over again. You have to go back and either retraverse the same area you just came through with new stars, or different layout for you to solve now that the new stars have spawned into the game. I'm actually really happy with the way that this art came out. All I did was use the grow and shrink tool to get different variations, and just change the color as I went. And I think I'm getting the hang of hue shifting. I don't know, but I feel like I've gotten the hang of it. As I was changing the brightness of the shading on the rock, I was also changing the hue. So considering how bad I usually am at art, I think this came out pretty good. And when it's in game, I'm just going to add a rotation effect so it's moving, and that way it's not just a static thing sitting there in the level. When I realized I was going to have that rotating, I realized that the clock was just sitting there. So I gave it an animation of it just bobbing up and down a little bit, just enough to give it some movement. The more static things there are on your screen, the more boring it is to look at. And then before I coded in the clock mechanic, I decided to create a particle effect so that when you run into the clock, it would expand off or break off into bits or something to make it look like some sort of time event was happening. In the end, after going through a few different variations, I decided to go with this one, where it just expands out from the original clock, gets bigger, and then fades away. Then I had to actually code in the clock reset mechanic, and this was fairly simple. When you click restart on the level itself, that restart button, it sets a variable within the fade transition screen to 1, so it switches that on from 0 to 1. And basically, when you hit the clock, that triggers, so it does the same thing as if you had clicked that reset button. And again, I used a calculator to divide something by 2. It's not that I'm dumb, it's my lack of confidence, and I don't want to screw up something integral to the game because I wasn't paying attention. I'd rather just let the calculator do it for me. That way I know the number is right. Since I was done with art, I moved on to coding the next mechanic, which is the mechanic from level 41 to 50, which is actually going to be a screen changing mechanic. So you'll no longer be confined to that little screen. You'll actually be moving from one screen to the next, which expands the game out quite a bit. I was originally going to have a few different collision objects that when you collided with that object, you'd move to that next scene. But instead I decided to go with the scene object, and this way it would just be a matter of when you're in collision with this new object, change camera to there. And this was pretty easy to set up. It was just a matter of having the camera lead move over to the new screen when the player left the screen and moved into the new one. It didn't really look how I wanted it to. It's currently triggering when you hit the wall. So when you go through the screen, nothing happens until you hit the wall, and then the screen pulls over. which isn't ideal, but because I didn't plan on this being in there in the first place, I would have had to go through and change a lot of stuff to make this work out. And then I moved on to the Big Bang mechanic, which is going to be the one from level 51 to 60. As I said in the original video, I wanted to make it so that every 10 levels you have a new mechanic to play with. Although I think from this point on, 6 mechanics is actually quite a lot. So the next, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 levels will just be different variations of all of those mechanics together. But setting up this mechanic was actually really simple. It was just creating a new object and calling it Star Spawner, laying it where I wanted the star to spawn, and then when the player collides with the Big Bang mechanic, using the same particle effect as the clock, where it expands out. I think I made it a little bigger though. When you collide with the Big Bang effect, it expands out and then the stars spawn. Realizing that the star colors change when the scene begins, I actually had to go in and fix that so that it does that after the stars spawn. And this way the color that you chose in the main menu persists even after you get new stars. I then wasted a bunch of time, trying to get the camera to pan over when you went into a new scene, and I don't know if it's the time crunch that I gave myself or if I'm just a dummy, but I couldn't seem to get it to work. I just could not get that to work, and I eventually just gave up on it. It's not as smooth as I want it to be, but I can create levels that work in a way that it's still satisfying to do that, to have the screen change when you smack into a wall as opposed to pan over. And it could also create some cool levels later down the line. When you're using the white hole mechanic to teleport from one screen to the next, you won't really know where you are because it didn't pan over. So you kind of have to figure out where you are at that point. And that in itself might be a cool mechanic. And yes, I did just justify my lack of skill by saying it's a game feature. I'm the creator, I'm allowed to do that. Once I got these mechanics in the game and working properly, I went back and started adding levels, starting from 31 on to 40, which is the race at time mechanic. Now this mechanic on its own isn't really the best, but in combination with the white hole mechanic and the rotating aim hole, yes, that's what I decided to call it, in combination with those two mechanics, it actually works out pretty well because you need to really carefully think about where you're going to go out of those holes, or where the aim hole is going to send you, or else you'll end up running into one of these clocks and failing the level. And when I moved on to the screen changing mechanic, I realized just how good this is going to be. Like it's going to feel really good, I think. I feel like by this point you'll be kind of getting bored with the game and it's going to get predictable. But by this level, once you go out of the screen onto another one, you're going to get one of those moments, like shock, like it'll wake you up out of the lazy stupor you've been in. At least that's what I'm hoping for. Now, if you look at this level, I don't know if I've said this before, but I like to set my levels up so that when there's a new mechanic added, the only thing you can interact with first is that new mechanic. And that way you kind of force the player to interact with it, and they don't skip it, and therefore not understand what it does. And unfortunately, that right there is where this stops. I am not going to make any promises for next week. I don't know how much or what I'm going to get done, but I am not promising 30 levels. That was just ill-advised. I spent a lot of time on it, and it was very rushed, and I don't feel very good about it. It's important to set big goals for yourself, but maybe just like a hint of realism would have been nice in there too. It's like having like a really sweet caramel. That's the big goal, and then a little bit of salt, just to finish it off. Anyhow, that's all I got done this week. If you found this devlog interesting, maybe click on that subscribe button. And if you want to talk to me personally, the link to our Discord is down below, called the Game Dev Fireside, and it's a pretty chill place to hang out and talk game dev. And if you decide to click on that link, then I'll see you there.